I think that means we're recording. So welcome everyone. I'm Rob Wilson still at UWA, and I'm really pleased to be able to have this conversation with Andrew Rogers, whom you can see on your screen. Andrew is a multi-award winning teacher whom we are very, very proud in Western Australia. Amongst his awards includes Australian Teacher of the Year, in the last, is it just last year, Andrew? That was
just last year, yes. So
yeah. Story, I think, about how he got started in philosophy, where we'll start the conversation, and we'll move through for the next sort of 35 minutes or so. And I'd like to invite students to drop questions into the chat as they come up, as they occur to you, so that we can maybe shape up the conversation in light of them. And then we'll finish the official recording part of it, and we'll open up for you to ask those questions that still remain, and give you an opportunity to ask those directly without that being recorded at the end. But feel free to start, feeding those into the chat at any time once we get moving. So welcome, Andrew. And as I said, we'll start just with the story of what is the story with you in philosophy? You're a teacher. What are you doing in philosophy?
Yeah, that's a great question. Look, thanks, Rob, and good morning, all competitors and philosothoners. It's great to spend some time with you on a Saturday morning. Look, my journey into philosophy, I think, is probably not the most traditional or orthodox journey in. I mean, I very much came to it sideways. When we agreed to do this interview, Rob, I was very much thinking back, when did it all start? And look, I think the best place to identify was just informal conversations at home. What you need to know is that my mother is a retired Church of England priest, and she was very much driving this, religious angle, I suppose, onto our family. And my response was always to ask questions and say, things like why, and try to work out some of these big questions that came up. She got really quite frustrated, I think, at one stage, because I just wouldn't take her answers at face value, and I just kept looking for more and looking for more. And she said, look, I've got nothing more to give you. Why don't you go and see this guy? And she sent me to her boss, who actually was the area priest. So I sat down and spent the evening with him over a nice cup of tea. And again, he got to the same point and said, well, look, I can't really give you any more, but can I recommend you a book? I thought, great, that's awesome. So this is the book they recommended. It's Sophie's World. I don't know if anybody's come across that. It was very recently published when I was growing up. And those who don't know the background, it's written by a Norwegian guy called Jostein Gaarder, who is actually a philosophy teacher. And he tried to make the subject open and more accessible to his students through the idea of a novel. And that, to me, just smashed me exactly where I needed to be smashed. And it really satisfied a lot of my curiosity. It gave me structure to my questions. It helped me consider things from multiple perspectives that I hadn't previously considered before. And that was really the opening of the door. And then I just wanted more. And at school, there wasn't a philosophy course at my school, but there was in England something called religious studies. It's a compulsory subject in England that everybody has to teach. But it's not as dogmatic as perhaps it might sound. If you're at a faith school already, you probably might understand what that means. But it's not just in England anyway about the driving of a particular religious background. What it is, it's all about looking at questions. And I suppose its natural name in Australia would be the philosophy of religion. It's sort of what we tend to call that. And again, that lit a spark and pushed me forward. So I selected it for one of my public examination subjects, and it really enabled me to open up to all of these big questions that we find in religion. What is God? Who is God? What about the problem of evil? Do miracles really happen? And it was that philosophical style of questioning, which I now understand it to be, that really was my early passion. So from there, I decided I'm going to go to university and study more of this. But I didn't do a philosophy degree. And thinking back, I probably should have. But my degree was in theology, the study of religion. But it was very much with a philosophical tint. So I selected all the philosophy of religion modules, and I ended up loving that so much. I then decided to do a master's, and my master's was in the Holocaust, actually, Jewish responses to the Holocaust and Jewish Christian relations. And again, there was a very much a problem of evil sort of tint on that. And the more I saw, the more I was interested, the more I asked, and the more I wanted to know. And so naturally, I think, when you finish your degree and you finish your master's, you're sort of thinking, well, what next? And I went into teaching, and quite, understandably, I started teaching my favorite subject, which was, religious studies, the study of religion and philosophy. And I was, had a great time doing that in the UK for a number of years. I think it was about 13 years we were working through that in England. And it was wonderful then being able to spark the interest that I had at school in young people in my classes. They were coming to it with very similar questions to me, and we were able then to really start to unpack and co-inquire and co-collaborate with many of those difficult questions. But my real philosophy journey, I didn't really start till we moved to Australia. Philosophy as we perhaps know it today. I met my wife in England, who's an Australian. She's from Canberra, actually. I noticed her old school, Marici College, is on here today. So, shout out to all the Marici students there. So my wife speaks very highly of her time there. We decided to move to Australia, and we were both school teachers. And it's very interesting when you come to Australia with a background in religious studies in England, because unless you go to a faith school, it's not taught in Australian curriculum. So I was very much trying to find a way where my skill set would fit. And I ended up applying for a job purely to teach philosophy and ethics at a school in the northern suburbs of Perth. Now, I don't know much about the rest of Australia, but philosophy teachers are very hard to come by. Certainly in the school setting. And so I was very fortunate enough to get the job to teach philosophy and ethics at a high school here. And that's really where my eyes were starting to open. I was then introduced to the philosophy in schools pedagogy, which is very much what the Philosothon is all about. I entered my first Philosothon competition as a coach, and this really was my epiphany moment. I took my students along, and I had no idea what was happening. But I was suddenly very excited about what philosophy really could be in the classroom setting. And rather than as we were teaching it in England, which is very much a history of ideas, this now was a real opportunity to teach thinking and to teach students how to inquire for themselves. So that was back in 2013, and I've not really looked back since. I've just been trying to find, every available opportunity to look for ways in which I can further my own understanding of this wonderful experience, try to engage as many students as I possibly can in as many avenues as I possibly can to explore philosophy for themselves.
Oh, wow. That's a very interesting sort of story. I'm curious about when you were sort of pushing back, let's say, against your mother and in the family.
Yes.
I'm imagining these dinner conversations,
That's right.
and then you're encountering Sophie's world. Did the word philosophy come up then, or because I'm trying to figure out how did you, like you're going on to figure out your own pathway in philosophy in some sense, but is the reason why you don't do philosophy at university because you haven't recognized that it's like palm olive, you've been like soaking in it all this time, but just not realized it?
I really like that analogy, and I think that's absolutely right. I mean, it was the name, the branding, I suppose. I mean, looking at my copy here in front of me, it's called An Adventure in Philosophy. But so, you'd think I would have twigged that, there was something that was going on there. But I think part of the passion for me was to really, this is going to sound terrible, but to try and prove my mother wrong, if you like. So, I figured the theology angle would have given me a lot more of an understanding, a lot more base with which to argue with her from. But then, of course, you take it on from your own understanding and your own passion, and then that widens and diversifies from there. So, philosophy is itself, as I said, I really should have perhaps twigged a bit quicker.
I don't know. It can sort of take a while, but it's interesting that those the initial impetus was around questions about the existence of God, the nature of evil, and even when you talked about your moment later on, you even used the word epiphany to think about that. But clearly, philosophy for you has involved a lot more, not only because you've gone into the teach philosophy and ethics over the last 10 years or so. Once you step out of the realm of sort of philosophy of religion as a sort of starting point, what else have you found really interesting in engaging students around? Is it stuff around ethics? Is that where a center is, or do you think it ranges more widely and for you and them?
Initially, it is ethics. I mean, that's the way in. That's the one topic that students really quite naturally enjoy, because it's all about asking the questions of what's the right thing to do, and how can we decide what's right, and how can we weigh up conflicting arguments, and how can we evaluate conflicting positions? And certainly in our media world where we are, it's the ethical questions that seem to get the most traction. These are the, the sort of less abstract ones, I would suggest, that you can actually hang something on. They're about people, they're about lives, they're about situations and consequences, about the decisions with which people make. And certainly I found in the classroom, the best way to be delivering this style of philosophy to the students is through case study. It's through stories. It's through being able to identify and being able to relate and try and empathize. There's a big, personal angle to that. I mean, I will find, the more abstract areas of philosophy slightly more tricky, to engage students. The more metaphysical stuff about existence and ontology and, ideas of being that really will go beyond our own individual understanding. But at the same time, those are the ones that we really get into that really seem to resonate. At my school at the moment, I run a weekly philosophy cafe. So it's just an opportunity for students to come along at lunchtime and bring their lunch and sit down about something meaningful. And it's really interesting because the most popular and most attended ones are the ethical ones. So where we do a question about gun crime or animal rights or this sort of thing, we end up, 25, 35 students arrive. The more metaphysical ones are my favorites, because they require an awful lot more of concentrated thought. One of the big ones we did was trying to work out what nothing is. Is there such a thing as nothing? And whilst they weren't as, perhaps as appealing a question, so the numbers were a little bit reduced, that to me was where the big thinking happened, because it was actually
the numbers they weren't reduced to nothing though, right?
Oh no, exactly. There was still very much something there. But when we're trying to, figure out, this whole idea about how do you put into words something that doesn't easily go into words, and that's the real where the real thoughts and real engagement seem to be happening the most.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think philosophers have to contribute to, say, just ethical thinking? Take that as a focal point. It's where, as you've suggested, it might come up most around media in the public sort of realm. And so, I mean, I'll play devil's advocate. Say, like, philosophers, they're just going to give us more questions than answers, and what we need in ethics are really answers. So why don't we have people who specialize? If we, for example, want to do medical ethics, why don't we just have doctors and get their expert opinion on what it is we should do in this particular, should we have this operation? Should we have this as a part of public policy? Should we have, vaccine mandates? That's a medical issue. Just, that's something there are specialists for this already.
Yes, I would absolutely agree. There are, and I think we absolutely do need to listen to the experts in those fields. It's really interesting because I've been on the radio quite recently just to do a little ethics slot, which has been quite good. And I've invited people to phone in and talk about their ideas. And one thing I've really noticed is that people are really good with opinions. People are really good with saying, well, this is obviously the right thing to do. But when you ask them why, that's when they just say, well, it just is. That's just how it is. And it's really interesting trying to have to coax reasons out of their opinions. And this, to me, is where philosophy really does come in, because philosophy is all about argument. It's all about putting together, some reasons. It's all about putting together reasons that will support the conclusion, rather than just being a pure opinion-based fact. And I think certainly if look at how it's portrayed in the media, it's often those who shout the loudest, who are the most controversial, who are the most outrageous in what they say, are the ones who get the media time, because these are the ones that sell newspapers. These are the ones that get clicks on the internet. These are the ones which people want to hear more about. But it's actually, perhaps the quieter, more reasoned approach that actually has the most traction and the most value. And certainly in terms of medical ethics, and when you've got real lives that are affected by these decisions, I think it becomes a very dangerous place when you've just got opinion which is unsupported.
So if I'm hearing you right, it's because philosophers can allow us to probe into reasons and to step back from just mere opinion. Is that the...
Yeah, that's my take on things. And I think that, when we can teach kids to reason for themselves, and also to be able to be met with opinions, other reasons that they don't necessarily see or don't necessarily hold, it's to probe again further. And your question there that, philosophers just keep asking questions. And I think there's a very good reason for that, is to make sure that the reasons that we come back to are actually valid reasons that actually are solid reasons that will then lead to the best outcome and the best decision.
Mm-hmm. So it's not just a matter of reaching a new kind of consensus, or is that what, coming up with better reasons amounts to? Is
Well,
it?
I guess sometimes it can be. And again, this idea of what we call synthesis, it's where we've got, two opposing positions and, we bring them together and we come up with a new one, this idea of the dialectical approach, that has got lots of value. I think it becomes quite difficult as well because, there's a right view according to society, but equally there's a right view that may not necessarily coincide with societal. And we've seen this before all over history. I mean, if you look at the philosophy of science going all the way back to Galileo, who comes up with an opinion that's really against public opinion, but at the same time it's something that he maintained and defended and was able to follow through on the strength of his beliefs. That's really becomes something quite powerful to do.
Mhm.
And I think doing philosophy, certainly in the public sphere, requires a lot of courage. It requires a lot of putting forward opinions that may not necessarily adhere to the popular approach, but at the same time are those which have got most traction and most support behind them.
Mhm. Now, I'm curious about your experience in schools. Obviously, you've had a position as philosophy and ethics teacher, and very, very successful, and we're very proud of you, as I've said, over here in WA, for all that you've accomplished, because you've also constructively contributed to the organization of philosophy in schools in this relatively small pool.
Yes.
So it might be this isn't quite the right way to ask the question, but let me start there. How do you find the reception amongst your peers to your philosophical endeavors? As enthusiastic as you can be with your students and generating all sorts of things. Is it carrying over? So in the schools, they're going, yep, that's amazing stuff. We're on board. We need to become philosophers ourselves. Or it's just like, yeah, why don't we teach like more real stuff? And
that's such a good question. I'm often reminded, actually, and I often feel like, Socrates referred to himself as the gadfly of Athens, that really irritating fly that just won't go away, just stop talking. That's how I very much think that I'm perceived in my school, because I just won't stop. Every opportunity, and I've literally tried for every opportunity in where it's possible in a school setting to try and bring in these skills, whether or not you call it philosophy or whether you call it something else. People, I think, seem to be quite put off by the name sometimes.
Yeah. So yeah, just a tiny bit dropped out, just a tiny bit of video, audio.
Okay, do you need me to go back a bit, or are we good?
Just go back a couple of sentences, but if you can't.
Yes, yeah. So I was just saying about how I've been really passionate about trying to get philosophy, or maybe it's the name of philosophy, but the skills that underpin it into other subject areas as well. So whilst I was employed to teach philosophy and ethics, I was also brought in to teach HAS as well, or humanities and social sciences. And I thought there's a real opportunity here to bring across some of these big questions that we have in philosophy into my humanities programs. And so I did. And so when we're talking about the atomic bomb in history, when we're talking about food equality in geography, when we're talking about what it means to be a responsible citizen in civics, even down to the economics about, how do we measure happiness? I was bringing philosophical inquiry into those classrooms and into those lessons. And that obviously caused a bit of a stir. People are thinking, what on earth is this guy doing? He's going way off textbook.
Yeah.
But then when people invite them in to have a look, they walk away completely wowed, and they say, what the level of thinking that these students were engaged in these lessons was just sublime. So rather than sitting there and doing these low level, let's read a book, copy out the questions, give the right answer, we were actually probing a lot deeper, a lot wider, a lot further. And so I've gone further from there and thought, there's a real opportunity here throughout many other subjects. So I presented at I was sitting on a panel actually at we have our annual HAS week here in Western Australia, where we celebrate everything to do with the HAS, and I managed to get a seat on the panel for a panel discussion. And at the end, one of the questions was, well, how then can we all become philosophers? Can you help us to do what you're doing? And that to me was really amazing, because again, people were then starting to see the value and starting to see how it can go into other subject areas. So I've been, slowly working away. I've been chipping away at the English department, because many of the things they do in English are very, very relevant to here. Science, as I've previously mentioned as well. And I've actually just secured a slot at the local digital technologies conference in a few weeks' time to present on the ethics of digitechnology and computing. which I think is huge. And I'm going to take the philosophical approach in the community of inquiry to that, with an opportunity there for seeing how that might work in that field too.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, because so this idea that philosophy kind of infuses or can readily infuse lots of these other subjects that we have and enhance them is
Absolutely.
one that I've also been sort of plugging a fair bit at UWA. And yesterday I mentioned a number of the programs that we have, but these are common things to have across different universities. So philosophy, politics, economics, for example, is a program that's getting a lot of traction. We have a new science and technology studies where philosophy, history, sociology,
Awesome.
and the sciences themselves all sort of come together. And we're hoping to attract students who, for example, will do a science major and they might do a second major.
That's
so
fantastic.
with a double major in STS, so they can think about the social context in which scientific ideas get generated and scientific policies get rolled out. Now, you can always fold that back into individual units or subjects, but we could actually have a more immersive experience for students there as well. The other realm in which I'd like to tease you out about, I know you have experience in, is the role of philosophy in the public sphere. So let's talk about infusing other sorts of subjects within a formal learning environment. But I know you'll have views about this. I'll just tell you one quick, we do these philosophers in residence.
Yes.
At one of your schools.
Yes, that's right. That was great.
I was at another school, and issues came up about a particular controversy around a near contemporary political figure, Christian Porter, who had been a student at that school.
Right.
And the philosophy students were kind of tasked with conducting a school-wide discussion about the impact of this, and apparently just sort of blew the minds of parents and others. There were well over 100 people at this meeting because it came home, the issue for them. And the philosophy students were kind of tasked with leading the discussion for this, and apparently it was really constructive in a difficult and fraught sort of area. So I found that kind of impressive. So you're stepping outside of the classroom, but I'm interested. You do stuff on radio. I'm surprised I haven't seen your YouTube channel yet or anything. But tell us a little bit about what you think philosophy's got to contribute in that realm and the sorts of stuff that you've done.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that's brilliant to hear that is being used in such a powerful manner. I mean, I can talk, not as impressive as that, but only yesterday, for instance, we had our training day for next year's prefect body. And we're sort of working through the process about where we go and what good leadership actually looks like. So I was invited along to give a little workshop, and there were 80 students there, and I did a very similar approach to this, and we started teasing out this idea about what good leadership actually is. And rather than the idea about I want to be a leader because I want to wear the badge and look important and tell people what to do, we ended up with a very real and very meaningful understanding about what a leader actually looks like within the school sphere. And the school setting and the school background. And that for me was really, really powerful, just to see that movement, if you like, from what we think we know to actually looking at something a little bit different as well. So that was really great. Now, in terms of where that goes actually in the public sphere again, I think there's a huge role for this skill, if you want to call it philosophy, if you want to call it critical thinking, if you just want to call it, respectful dialogue, all of these things, I think there's a massive role for that to play. Certainly when you look at policymakers, you just look at people in their day-to-day existence. We've mentioned issues like economics, and we've mentioned issues like animal farming, because again in Western Australia there's a huge farming community, and one thing that's come out on the radio when I've been doing that show is a couple of farmers have been phoning in, giving their own individual perspective, which again is something that many in our Perth metro region have never really encountered before. And I think it's just the bringing together of different trains of thought in a respectful dialogue where we can learn from each other, and we're then able to make meaningful decisions, develop relationships, and then ultimately help to understand each other an awful lot better. So yeah, there's a huge role to play for me there, Rob.
Yeah. And I'm going to remind students, facilitators, judges that you can start to drop questions, comments in the chat, and we'll start to pick those up as we end the recording. So feel free to start doing that. But in the last sort of 10 minutes or so, I wanted to move on to ask you a little bit about your views about diversity in philosophy, both in terms of content of materials. You've talked about your particular interest in what got you started. For some people that'll resonate. For other people it'll be something completely different in terms of the content and area. Some people will be all about nothing. Like they'll be like, yeah, that's my thing, right? That's my special topic. And
yes,
what really switched me on. It's kind of interesting. But I'm also interested in diversity in terms of who does philosophy, who finds themselves in a philosophy classroom. And we talked a little bit about this in yesterday's conversation as well. And you know, last year I was talking to Deb Brown about it in the conversation as well. It's a kind of, you know, ongoing interest of mine for particular sorts of reasons. But what's your view of philosophy classrooms? Would you say as diverse as they could be? Are you pulling in a representative sampling of students, or do you notice sorts of trends, or is there more that we could do in terms of the kinds of areas that we covered to make it more welcome? I mean, one of the issues that I sometimes point out to people, so you know, there are many different dimensions of diversity, so lots of things can fall under that heading. But if you take, say, gender diversity, roughly the ratio of males to females in philosophy major programs is roughly 3 to 1. If you look at the representation in the rooms here, I would say it's 1 to 3 the other way around, right? Reflects the school population. So what's going on there? But that's only one. We could talk a little bit about disability. We could talk about sort of cultural backgrounds, language biases, and all sorts of things that shape up who feels welcome in the classroom. Does everyone feel welcome, do you think?
And that's a great question. Look, one brand new thing I'm working on at the moment, which has never really occurred to me, except in the last few weeks or so. I'm working in a school now with a significant Indigenous population. And Indigenous spirituality, Indigenous philosophy is something I've never really previously considered. And one of the units of work which we are, delivering.
Let me stop you right there. Hang on. Why do you think you haven't considered it before? You're kind of, this is your go-to area.
Well, that's the thing. But look, I mean, my previous school where I worked at in Western Australia for 8 years was very much monocultural. It was very much full of English and South African migrants. And I didn't really have any interaction with Indigenous students, Indigenous teachers. And so this year I've just recently moved schools, and the representation of Indigenous students is probably 7 or 8% of the school body, which is a quite significant amount. And their zone, their centre, their room, if you like, is right next to mine. So naturally there's a lot of interaction that goes on, and I've exposed a lot of gaps in my understanding. I've been chatting to their teacher, I suppose, mentor perhaps is probably the best name for him. And we've worked really hard to get some Indigenous voices into our units of work. Part of my job as well is teaching philosophy, is teaching religious studies as well. It's called Religion, Philosophy and Ethics. And we're doing an Indigenous unit now in year 8, just to look at, connection to land, connection to country, and what that looks like. And there's a real interest, I think, from many people, certainly in our school anyway, about what that actually looks like. And listening to, voices such as Stan Grant and on the radio and his take on things. And I think there's a real opportunity for a real dialogue between people of Indigenous spirituality, Indigenous background, and those of us like me who really haven't. And it's really fascinating actually to see if there's any common ground with which there is. And if you're talking about the philosophy of nature, the philosophy of the environment and what that actually looks like, I think there's a real opportunity there to really understand each other through this philosophical dialogue with which we've got going on. So that's one example, certainly in where I'm sort of pursuing things, and it's motivated me to do a lot more research, to do a lot more exploration about what Indigenous philosophy, Indigenous spirituality actually looks like with connection to land and country, and it's very exciting actually to be presented with this new topic, this new sphere. And you suddenly realize how much actually resonates with where I sort of already am anyway, but at the same time to be open to movement and open to looking at new ideas, and ultimately listening to what's being said.
So that's leading to changes in the curricular offerings or the methodology that you're using, or the students
very much so
into philosophy classrooms, or
I mean, it's really interesting because when I run these community of inquiries, the Indigenous students straight away said, oh, we know this is like a yarning circle, we do this. And that was great, because then that barrier was then, sort of removed straight away, and everybody was, the Indigenous students especially, knew what was the expectations were, knew how to proceed with the level of respect and ability to listen. So that was really powerful. So yeah, this new unit of work we're doing has been fantastically interesting, motivating, challenging as well, to see where that's leading us. And, we're starting to hear more and more of those Indigenous voices come forward.
And obviously the school must be very supportive of this development, right? And this interaction between the two parts of the school. Was there a history of them, the philosophy and sort of, I don't know if you wouldn't call it Indigenous studies, but there's an Indigenous centering component.
There's very much an Indigenous program, which obviously caters for the Indigenous students and their cultural requirements and obvious needs to have in a school environment. I'm not too sure of the background in terms of where things came from, but it's really clear now that it's an integral part of where they are in the school. And one of the assessment tasks we set for them was, how can we improve relations between, how can we raise the Indigenous voice at our school? And one of the students very, very quickly said, well, why don't we ask them? And I thought that was amazing, just to see right off, this is not about us, coming with the answers. This is about a genuine need for dialogue and a genuine need for understanding. And it's incredibly powerful to watch that unfold.
Yeah. Do you think that's already present in our society now, that listening and knowing, the sense of knowing where to go to, and that respectful deference, I think, to the people who have the lived experience of right around the issues that you're trying to sort of sort out? Or do you think it's got a long way to go? I
think there's still some way to go. I really do. I mean, it almost seems as though the policymakers think, right, we've got this sorted. We know what we're doing. We're going to do it this way. And then we get these, protests and outrage. And I think if we, went along it in the way of meaningful dialogue and wanting to listen and understand together from the start, things would be very, very different. I'm very interested to watch unfold, the current move in, the federal politics, to see more of an Indigenous voice in our constitution. And I've been, watching that unfold. And I think that's going to be a very, very interesting story to watch as it comes through. I really, really hope they manage to get things right. And they do the listening that needs to happen, to ensure we can get a meaningful move forward.
And students, as you probably know, if you had a look at the program, they've just talked about a topic on Australia Day.
Yes, great.
Right now, because they may have questions around that, and reflecting on their own discussions in their groups. I was sort of not quite being the Socratic gadfly. I was too brief for that. I was more like some kind of drunken hummingbird, maybe going from room to room. Didn't really get to savor the discussions in their richness. But we might end up hearing from some of those, or students may reflect on the connections between those discussions and some of these topics here. Are there other?
Brilliant.
Yeah. Are there other things that you want to throw into the discussion as we start to sort of wind up and open up for a broader interaction with people who are, in some sense, in the room with this? Is there something that you
look, I mean, one thing I would really value actually is just some input, if anybody's able to provide that. One of my next projects I'm starting to put together is to consider delivering a podcast which would be aimed at the students of the age with which you're working with at the moment. I'm just obviously it would be quite philosophical in its approach, and just sort of wondering if there'd be any topics or any areas of interest. What I'm sort of thinking of is, an initial sort of stimulus following the community inquiry sort of pedagogy and this sort of idea, and then open it up to discussion. One of the things that's worked quite well on the radio show is sort of live discussion. That's very difficult in a podcast environment, but maybe there's an opportunity to record some, community inquiries. And would there be an interest in students listening to that sort of podcast to, hear other voices from different topics? Are there any topics in particular that they would be interested in hearing more about, or further exploration? Because really, I've got my ideas, but it'd be even better again to hear what the students would have to say about that.
And would that be a sort of weekly thing, or
at the moment we're still sort of very much in the idea stage. I mean, I've found a producer to work with, which is really exciting, and then it would very much be of a regular sort of thing. So weekly, fortnightly, just to meet the need in terms of where that would be.
And are there any secrets about where this will appear, just in general podcast space, or do you have venues?
No, nothing really to disclose at this particular point in time, so I can't give you sort of any exclusive access and all of this.
I'll speak to your agent separately once.
Yes, that's right. Exactly. We'll go down that particular road. So yeah, I mean, that's something. My next idea, and again, it's bringing philosophy out of the classroom really into the public space, which is exactly what we've been talking about earlier on. Because I think there's such a valuable role to play, and the more space with which we can expose that to, I think that's going to be very, very exciting to see.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, and I think one of the directions that the philosophy profession, such as it is, as represented by the AAP, has headed in the last 10 years, is to be much more aware of that public space and what we could do in it.
Yes,
all sorts of levels, and I actually think to have students taking on a podcast like this and playing a major role in it, maybe with a little help and guidance from people, but really being the ones in control, that would be amazing. I maybe there must be some versions of this around, but to try and sort of bring that out a bit more and to encourage people to take that plunge, and if we could facilitate it, I think that would be really.
I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, the seed was really sown actually from students themselves. They often come up with the best ideas. They started a school podcast, a few years ago, invited me on as a guest, and I thought, this is great. This is really good. To be able to have this forum where students can ask the questions that are meaningful to them, but have a wider audience to listen to that sort of forum, rather than just being, the dozen or 20 or so students you've got in the classroom. Just to give it that wider space to explore these issues.
Yeah, so one thing that started to happen a little bit in the university environment is you've now got people making TikTok videos for philosophy instruction, right?
Right.
So you've got something on a dilemma. There might be an issue around abortion, or it might be another about environmental degradation or something, and you've got a 2-minute TikTok video that is now used in the university sort of environment. It's quite, obviously there's a lot of pushback against that from some people, but I think they're really interesting avenues to explore new forms of social media and ways of engaging, right? That are
very much so.
Driven by images, but it's it's interesting to think how that fits in with the sort of more silent, well-paced kind of interventions that we were talking about earlier, in the emphasis on argumentation. Again, it came up yesterday. It's the role of emotion in philosophical engagement and what might be used there. But I think we need all those tools, at our disposal, and to think innovatively about how we might, engage a broader range of people.
I agree 100%. I mean, again, I'm reminded as where philosophy actually began. It was in the marketplace where the people were. Socrates moved it out into where the people were on a day-to-day, and I think this is the role of philosophy in our world today, is to meet the people where they're at. And certainly, these new forms of media you're describing is a fantastic example of how that would look. And again, I've taken philosophy down to the junior school at my school. We've been doing it, with years 3 and 4, which has been wonderful to see them and meet them where they're at, and to talk about what's important to those guys is yet another example of how that would be. So yeah, I mean, I'd be very, very open and very excited to see other opportunities as to where philosophy could be put in that public sphere. It'd be great.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to seeing where this podcast idea goes with you, and recruiting active minds into it.
Well, that's the beauty of it. I mean, we'll be looking for special guests. So, Rob, if you're ever interested and want to come on and talk about certain issues.
I'm thinking about people with real ideas, like young people, like that.
Well, again, and that's part of the dream is if we can get on board with young people and where they want to take it, it'll just drive and it'll unfold and we'll follow the people. So that'll be great.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to wrap up the formal recorded part of the conversation now, and we'll turn and open things up and see if there are any questions or comments. And thanks very much for joining us for this. Of course, you hang around to answer those.
No, I will do. Thank you very much.
Shepherding them over to you as they come in. Andrew Rogers, thanks a lot. That's great.
No, thank you very much, Rob. Thanks for having me, and thanks for everybody for listening into the conversation this morning. I wish you all well in what remains of your competition, and I'll be looking forward to hearing lots of exciting things from you in the future. So thank you very much.
Okay, thanks. Kaz, are you there?
Yes, sorry. Just putting out spot fires.
Another fire. All right. Yeah, just turn that recording off and then we'll open things up for
the recording.
Yeah, sorry, I thought that's what you were doing. I was like, ooh.